Well, hey, reality life groups, and welcome to your first life group meeting. Well, most of you, it's your first time. Some of you have been going on for a while now, but I'm excited for all of you that have decided to take this journey with us of pursuing Christ, of knowing more about who He is, which is the whole purpose of our salvation. Is, as I mentioned on Sunday, and John 17 tells us, is that to know Christ actually is eternal life, and that's a concept that still just blows my mind. And so I'm very excited that you have decided to take this seriously and to pursue Christ with us. And I pray that as you do this with us, as we all do this together, that He will make Himself known to us in ways that perhaps we never imagined before. And who knows what He can do through us when we are this willing. So anyway, this video, the purpose of this is I want to give you a little bit of teaching on John chapter 1, which hopefully you have read before meeting today in your group. It's not a super long chapter. I'm going to cover some details about the first 18 or so verses, which is commonly referred to as the prologue, or the prologue to John's gospel, in which he kind of gives a summary of who this Jesus is in pretty big concept terms. And so without further ado, let's get in. And I hope if you have a Bible with you, please open it up to John chapter 1 and follow along with me. John begins his gospel with, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." He was with God in the beginning. So John begins his gospel with an extremely powerful and controversial statement, the weight of which really is generally lost on us in the modern context. First, he says that in the beginning was the Word. Now, in the Greek, the wording expresses that the Word was pre-existing the beginning, as in the beginning, the Word already existed. It already existed, and that it's the same for the rest of the statement. The Word was always with God, and the Word was always God. Second is the question of, why does John call Jesus the Word? What exactly does that mean? Well, the Greek word used is logos. Greek has two words for word. One is logos and one is rhema. The strict definitions are as follows. Logos is an expression of thought, a broad term meaning reasoning expressed by words, whereas rhema is really any sound produced by the voice and having a definite meaning. So one way of thinking of it is that rhema is actually the word spoken, whereas logos is deeper and includes the thoughts and meanings behind the word. But aside from the dictionary definition, logos had a greater and different meaning to both the Jews and the Greeks of that time, and it is these two larger concepts that John wants to fuse into the person of Christ. John MacArthur explains it briefly. I'll read this to you. He says, "To the Greek philosophers, the logos was the impersonal, abstract principle of reason and order in the universe. It was in some sense a creative force and also the source of wisdom. The average Greek may not have fully understood all the nuances of meaning with which the philosophers invested in the term logos, yet even to laymen the term would have signified one of the most important principles of the universe. To the Greeks, then, John presented Jesus as the personification and embodiment of the Logos. Unlike the Greek concept, however, Jesus was not an impersonal force or principle or emanation. In him, the true Logos, who was God, became a man, a concept that was very foreign to Greek thought. But Logos was not just a Greek concept. The word of the Lord was also a significant Old Testament theme well known to Jews. The word of the Lord, the word, logos, of the Lord, was the expression of divine power and wisdom. And John presented Jesus to his Jewish readers as the incarnation of the divine power and revelation of God. A very powerful concept. And so in the person of Jesus Christ was the Word, the logos, the epitome of reason, God's very essence and understanding. It's more than our minds can really comprehend. John continues, verse 3, he says, "Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made." We've talked about this many times. Jesus is the creator of all things. And we talked before how he's also the sustainer. He holds it all together in some way. Continues, verse 4, "In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind." Verse 5, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." This is another big concept that John was applying to the person of Jesus. He is ascribing life itself, Zoe life. In the Greek, there were three kinds of life: Zoe life, bios, and suke. Suke was kind of your mental, emotional, and bios was you have blood, you have you have a body. Zoe was the divine eternal life, the effectively the divine eternal life, and so he's saying that this divine eternal life is Jesus. That Jesus is life, and all else, therefore, is death. And then he equates that life, that Zoe life, and therefore Jesus, to the concept of light, which John uses frequently in his gospel and in his letters, light as opposed to darkness. And he's not just talking about what we can see with our eyes, what comes from the sun, but light as in representing good, and darkness as in representing evil. He is equating Jesus, the person, to light, meaning that all else is darkness. Jesus, the person, is good, all else is evil. Then he notes that the light, the good, the life, Jesus, overcomes the darkness. Jesus is the overcomer. Again, powerful statements. And then he mentions John the Baptist, a person that his audience would have known very well. Verse 6, he says, "There was a man sent from God whose name was John the Baptist. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light, he came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world." Now, many back in those days thought that John the Baptist might have been the Messiah, but John the Baptist himself denied it, and the Apostle John makes it clear here that he was only a witness to testify about the light that was coming into the world. Then back to John the Apostle, he summarizes what happened when Jesus came to earth in verse 10 and 11. This is powerful. He says, "He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him." It's truly tragic that the creator, owner, sustainer, ruler of the earth came to be with the people that he created to give us light, to give us life, to give us freedom, and most would not have it. But there were a few that did. And he talks about them in verse 12. He says, "Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or a husband's will, but born of God." So those who would accept who Jesus is, who he truly is, and respond appropriately are adopted into the family of God, which again is a concept too big for our feeble minds. Verse 14, it says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." So John spells out that Jesus, God, the light, the good, the Word, became human being. And that he, John himself, and other disciples actually saw him, witnessed him, touched him, was with him. And remember that John, this apostle, was one of the three. He was not only one of the 12, he was one of the special three, Peter, James, and John. He got to see him transfigured in his glory on the mountain. He was one of the first to see him raised from the dead, and so on and so forth. And so John had a special eyewitness account of Jesus, which he talks about here in his gospel. And so one more allusion to John the Baptist. In verse 15, he says, "John testified concerning him. He cried out, saying, 'This is the one I spoke about when I said, he who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me.'" And so John is, the Baptist is speaking to the fact that Jesus is eternal, because John the Baptist was Jesus' cousin, and he was 6 months older than Jesus in a earthly sense, but John realizes that Jesus was in fact eternal, and he is therefore before me, even though I am technically in a flesh way before him. And then John the Apostle rounds out his prologue with even more. Verse 16, he says, "Out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given," or to say grace upon grace. "For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ." Notice this is actually the first time so far in this gospel that Jesus is referenced by name. Before he was the Word, he was the life, he was the light, and so on. But finally he calls him out by name. The grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. "No one has ever seen God but the one and only Son." So here he's calling him the Son of God. He hasn't mentioned that before yet. who is himself God, again equating him to God, and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him know. So again, he calls Jesus God. He is God and in relationship with God. Again, the Trinity, the multiple persons, all one God. It's still more than we can totally understand. And then he finishes his prologue basically saying that if you want to know God, you have to know Jesus. He says no one has ever seen God. No one has ever truly perceived God. Seeing is not just what you can do with your eyes. It's understanding. It's apprehending. It's comprehending. It says no one has ever done that for God. No one knows God like the Son, who is himself God and in closest relationship with the Father. What did he do? He says he has made him known. And so it all goes back to what we've been talking about and what the whole purpose of these life groups and this pursuing Christ is about. It's about knowing God, knowing Christ, because they're one and the same. Jesus said in John 17 that this is eternal life, to know you, God, and the Son that you sent, me. The eternal life is knowing Christ. And so, my friends, I urge you, as we continue these studies and we dig through John and other Gospels, that we gaze upon Jesus and recognize that we're gazing on more than just a man. We're gazing on God himself. He has revealed himself. He's making himself known to us, which is eternal life. And so, chew on that for a little bit and see if it doesn't wreck you. And I pray that God blesses your group, that you have a great time, that you grow closer in relationships, and I look forward to seeing you again next Sunday, and I'll probably have another video for you. So God bless. I love you guys. Take care.